just go over this DACA passage because it is important. Ultimately, this will get passed in the event that there'll be an executive action in the event that Donald Trump is voted out in 2020. But vote was 237 of 187 for the American Dream and Promise Act of 2019. This would grant dreamers. These are people who were brought to this country as children, as minors, by their parents, no choice of their own, obviously. And they will get 10 years of legal resident status if they meet certain requirements: high school diploma, participation in military service, and then they would receive, stay out of trouble in terms of, specific problems with the law. They would then receive permanent green cards after completing at least 2 years of higher education or military service, or after working for 3 years. And this is the first time that this legislation there's been attempts, I think, over the course of 20 years to pass this legislation. It's the first time. Senate rejected 4 immigration bills. I think at least one of them included citizenship for dreamers. And this is indicative of, this is for 2.5 million people, incidentally, who have been living with a tremendous amount of anxiety for no reason, for absolutely no reason. Like, I see what it's like to be a 13 or 14-year-old kid, just the enormous amount of anxiety you have just by having to be like a teen or being a kid. And the idea that there's also this element of like, will I get deported? When I walk down the street, will I get deported? Will I be here in 6 months? What will my future be? I don't speak the language from the country I came from, whether it was Eritrea or Mexico or Guatemala or, Slovenia or whatever it was. And will I get sent back to this country that is basically a foreign country to me? 2.5 million people. Very easy for a lot of people to forget that there is a significant portion of our population that walks around in a constant low-grade sense of fear or potential doom just by the very nature of who they are, where they were born, what decision their parents made for them. And it's been passed. It's not perfect. There are provisions that allow the Secretary of Homeland Security the discretion to deny legal status to immigrants with certain juvenile judgments against them, gang affiliation, etc. But it's a step in the right direction. And it's indicative of what's been going on for 5 months. The House has taken up 51 bills since January, 49 of which they've passed. I think this was actually written before they passed this this DREAM Act. It was. Bills that include lower prescription drug prices, protect pre-existing conditions. Disaster aid is now passed, so I think that's 51 for 51. They passed H.R. 1, which had a whole host of reforms, bills to save net neutrality, bills to broaden background checks for guns, calls to put us back into the Paris Climate Accord. They passed the Violence Against Women's Reauthorization Act. Chemical facility anti-terrorism standards. I mean, it goes on and on. Federal Civilian Workforce Pay Raise Fairness Act. Basically reinstituting the executive orders that Obama had passed that Trump has reversed. All of which have died in the Senate. Now they've run out of bills. Hopefully they'll start immigration proceedings soon. Maybe there's been they haven't done a great ability of making it about obstruction from the Republicans on these things that I think are would be very popular in and of themselves. But this is what's been going on. And meanwhile, you have all these bills that are passed. They're awaiting a Democratic Senate. Joe Biden came out with a climate plan. Some of it was plagiarized. Fortunately, some of it was also borrowed from the Green New Deal. There's now broad Democratic consensus over many aspects of the Green New Deal, including the dollar amount in public investment, $1.7 trillion. The cost that would be laid on polluters, that there would end fossil fuel subsidies, that there would be economic justice protections for people displaced in the transition from their jobs. They would end drilling on public lands and offshore. There's been a lot of sort of like mainstreaming of these broad positions, not unlike we've seen with Medicare for All. And so there's a lot of encouraging things that are happening, at least to the extent that you can have encouraging things happening when you don't have the ability to do any of this stuff. Now, I can tell you right now that if the Democrats take the Senate and the presidency, they will not deliver on all this stuff. It's just simply not the way it works. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't insist that they do. And the more insisting, the more likely it'll happen. Part of that is going to be a function of who, if the Democrats win the presidency, who that president is. A lot of these things are more likely under some candidates than others. I mean, I think I think there's probably broad understanding of that. Just other people might just say like, well, but it's not that important. Right now, the most important thing is getting rid of Trump. And I think that is perhaps the most important thing, but it's not necessarily the case that by rejecting positions that are consensus positions among Democrats, that you're going to get rid of Trump. It could be just very well be the opposite, at least if you look at the polling. So that's where we stand today.